Hit the ground running with the most revolutionary personal training program ever developed. The National Academy of Sports Medicine, the #1 choice for fitness professionals, makes it quick, easy, and affordable to learn on the go. Be your own boss and start transforming lives from 9 to 99 with the all-new certified personal training program only at NASM.org.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT podcast with Rick Ritchie, the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Welcome, everybody, to the NASM-CPT podcast. My name is Rick Ritchie. I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. I also want to thank you for your feedback and your continued communication. So I have people that, whether it's through Instagram and direct messages or through email, have been reaching out. And I have several episodes that will be coming up soon just from people who have asked questions and said, hey, can you tell me more about this? Can you talk about this? I've got a topic for you. I'm taking those topics and I'm listening and I am responding. So hopefully we'll get some of those in soon. But before that happens, I want to introduce my guest. And she's been on the show before. And today we're going to be talking about something pretty cool. We're going to talk about the effects of stress on the brain. And we're going to talk about the effects of exercise on stress. And we're going to be talking about a conference that will be discussing this and many more. And she's a big part of the creation of something called the Society of Neurosports. She is part of our scientific advisory board. Today, I want to welcome back to the show, Dr. Jamie Tartar. Jamie Tartar. I said Amy, my goodness. Jamie, how are you?
I'm awesome. How are you? It's great to be back. Thanks, Rick.
Hey, I am doing really well. I'm excited about the conference that you have coming up. So tell us a little bit more about the Society for Neurosports and your kind of integral role in that and why it came about and how it developed. And then we'll talk about the conference a little bit. And then I want to talk about stress and the brain.
Okay, sounds great. Well, it really came about because I started doing an experiment looking at the effect of acute exercise on emotional well-being. So in order to do that, I know a lot about the brain and we were looking at EEG measures, but I had to reach out to some of my friends here at NSU who do exercise physiology. So we did that experiment, but it seemed that as we started talking, there were multiple experiments that we could do and we did together. And as we started to look at the literature, we realized that there were a lot of neuroscientists who were starting to do research in exercise, looking at the effects of exercise on brain health. And conversely, there were a lot of people in the exercise field that were starting to look above the neck for performance, things like sleep and emotion, as things that could potentially affect performance. And we really wanted to give sort of that academic home to people working in what is clearly the field of sport neuroscience, but it didn't really have an academic home for them to present their research and start collaborating. So we had the first conference in November of 2019, which was absolutely amazing. It was fantastic to bring all these different types of people together. And then obviously coronavirus happened. So we had to put the second conference on pause, but we will be having the second one in March 26th and 27th down here in the beautiful and sunny South Florida.
I think you get away with a few things in South Florida, like actually having people show up at events. So it will be both live. So there will be a live component and it will be virtual. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So we're having the live event with the speakers and a small number of people using masks and social distancing. And it will also be a webinar format. So everybody can attend virtually.
Nice. And there's another person who's on the NASM Scientific Advisory Board, Dr. Allison Brager, who I believe is presenting at the conference. And if people have been listening to this show, then she has been on the show before, and she's been a fan favorite. So
yeah, she's the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. And what does she do? Is she talking about sleep? What is
I'm going to talk about sleep. So it's basically going to be Allison and her friend group. They're going to be, they have a session called Gains Are Made in the Bedroom, the Role of Sleep in Recovery and Performance. So it's Allison, Dr. Michael Grander, who's really big researcher in sleep and sleep and performance, and Dr. Singh. So they're going to be doing sort of a panel discussion on sleep like the pros and how you can use research and consulting and public policy with collegiate and professional athletes. And improving sleep is obviously a big part of that.
It really is. I was working with a group out of Atlanta, and they were a group that did a lot of work and assessments on athletes in particular. And they said one of their biggest problems was, we can do assessments, and we do assessments great. We can put together programming. We do programming great. People get hurt. We deal with injuries really well and success. He said, but one of the problems are that we have all of these elite athletes and we can't get them to sleep, right?
Yeah.
Like they stay up, and a lot of them are young. They're staying up. They're watching movies, playing video games. They have these things, and then their mind is spinning. Their minds are reeling, and they have a hard time going to sleep. And as we know, or at least what I believe we know, is that there is a strong correlation between sleep and performance.
Yeah.
And so for this group that I was working with, they were really concerned about the sleep of their athletes because they're elite performers, but can they be elite-er?
Right. Well, I think that's the problem, is that people think while you're sleeping, nothing's really happening and you're wasting time. And when you're younger, it's easier to stay awake late at night. It's much easier for you to do that. But we know that it's even beyond correlational. We know that if we increase sleep in athletes, they perform better. And, it's just like any other ergogenic thing that you could do. If you could give somebody a nutritional supplement to increase performance, you would do that. So I think there's sort of that misunderstanding that in order to even consolidate a motor skill, right, to learn a new motor movement or to strengthen motor movements, that happens during sleep. Testosterone's released at higher levels during sleep. Growth hormones released at higher levels during sleep. So even just something as simple as growing and maintaining muscle density, you need sleep to do that. And then there's this other relationship with sleep and obesity. We know that when people decrease their sleep, they gain fat in ways that we don't completely understand. We know certainly that hunger hormones increase and they're hungrier and they tend to eat things like carbs. But independently of that, there seems to be some basic metabolic changes that increase body fat when you're sleeping less. So for every reason, you should be sleeping well.
I think that's very, very high on the list, and it has grown in importance to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I can speak just a little anecdotally. I have recently started playing a musical instrument. I've recently started playing the ukulele, and our little ukulele playing. And years ago, my buddy Michael was like, "Hey, you should play guitar. Like, just start playing it. Borrow mine." And I was like, my fingers cannot move that way. They just can't.
Right.
And so I'm blaming my inability to play this instrument because my fingers don't move in a way that I've never requested them to move. Right. So I was like, I just can't play. So anyway, my wife got a ukulele for us for the holidays. And I was like, I'm just going to do this. Right. Like, I'm just going to start doing it and get better one note at a time. Right. It was crazy. There's some notes that were really easy and some notes like a G. I couldn't get my it was like I had to arm wrestle my fingers to get them to go. And then I would notice that practicing new notes, it's like they weren't happening. When I got up the next day, it's like they went there automatically.
Right.
And I know that's completely anecdotal, but still, what a clear connection through that experience that my brain was like, all right, I just needed time to kind of identify what you were requesting of me. And then I could put my finger on these strings the way that they go. I think it's important to understand that sleep is part of this encoding process.
It is. And if we measured your brain, if we could somehow like get into your brain while you were sleeping, we would see just that you were replaying those movement sequences during, a couple of phases of sleep are particularly important. So like sleep spindles and REM sleep play a really important role in that muscle memory, motor memory consolidation. I mean, all sleep matters, but different stages of sleep are sort of, more important for specific tasks. And it's funny that you talk about the ukulele, because that's actually one of the most, not the ukulele, but one of the most commonly demonstrated motor tasks people use it's a finger movement sequence. So they use your non-dominant finger, your non-dominant hand. And we've done this. We just finished up a study doing that. And you teach people a novel movement sequence, and they don't get better within a day. Even if you control for the number of hours, that you get better between days, and sleep is the reason you get better.
I love it. I love it. Well, let me reintroduce you again, everybody. This is Dr. Jamie Tartar. She's a PhD, and she's a part of the neuroscience program. She's the director and the research director at the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Nova Southeastern University. And I want to thank you again for being here. Let's get into maybe a few more interesting topics that are going to be brought up at the conference. And then I want to get into discussing stress.
Right. And so with that idea that sport neuroscience is really sort of a big, broad umbrella, we have, one session is going to be on traumatic brain injury. And so we're going to have 3 speakers who are going to look at the effects of concussion on the brain and different treatments and different activities that are available to help treat concussion and brain injury. Yeah. We also have some interesting trio from University of Miami that look at sort of mind-body relationships. So they're going to come talk about their research in mind-body relationships. We even have a session with physical therapists, and one of them is going to come talk about breathing, and she'll take us through some of the different breathing techniques that she uses with her clients. And so we're all going to learn how controlling our breathing can make such a huge difference in performance. One of my good friends here at NSU, he's actually going to be doing a really interesting talk with a couple of other people, and he specializes in mindfulness. So it's this basic idea that can you change your cognition to change your performance? And so he has some really interesting data to talk about looking at mindfulness and the ability to control attentional networks and how that can improve performance. So you can see sort of this broad scope of what really the field is all about.
Yeah, I'm curious, the people from Miami, are they part, because it's an interesting group. There's a study group there called the Touch Research Institute in Miami, and they do a lot of really interesting things with how touch, and some of it has to do with body work, some of it has to do with connection and how that affects people emotionally. Anyway, I think it's an interesting group there. And when I went through my license of massage therapy program at the Swedish Institute, that was one of the big research groups that we pulled information from, was the Touch Research Institute at University of Miami. So probably not the same group, but I find it very interesting, again, that there's something to do with human connection and how that helps with mental health.
Right. I think they're going to do some research on flow cognitive states and body cognition. But I think you're right. And there's also, which you're probably aware of, there's research to suggest that if you touch somebody, if you hug somebody and we have to be careful about hugging people right now. Right. Hugging people can actually give you a little immune boost for the rest of the day, and it can give you a little bit of a psychological boost and sort of inoculate you against negative events that happen to you, just from a meaningful hug. So we do need touch. We need to hug each other and be comfortable with that. Oh
my goodness. This is one of the great things about having young kids, is that they still hug. So
I think I told you I have 14-year-old twins, and my daughter's still very into hugging, but my son, it's like, he's just so like, if I go quickly, I can kind of get like a kiss on his head, but I got to get in and get out real fast.
Right. Right. And then you get the mom.
Yeah, he's just very and he's taller. I'm tall. I'm 5'11", and he's 6'1", so it's like it's hard to get up there.
Yeah, you got to sneak up on him while they're at the dinner table and seated.
Yeah.
A little peck on the head and then run away. So let's go into a little bit about what was the process of selecting topics for this conference and selecting some of the people that ended up coming in and being a part of this?
Well, we wanted to try to capture broad topics. So we were really looking for speakers who could really come at the sport neuroscience field from different perspectives. And so that was our really important consideration. The other important consideration for this conference was the people who were local, because we got to be very careful. So some of the speakers so our keynote speaker is actually Wendy Suzuki, and she's absolutely amazing. I don't know if you've seen her TED Talk on the effects of exercise on the brain. So she's going to be talking to us about the astonishing effects of exercise on the brain. She's in New York, and another speaker in New York. It looks like they're going to have to be broadcast to us because of travel restrictions.
Yeah.
Speakers are or in person. One of our speakers, for example, is coming at movement from an evolutionary biology perspective. How do we move based on what was adapted for our ancestors? And he's going to be talking about things like the right-handed versus left-handed advantage, and even just how we throw things based on how early humans, would pick up a rock and throw it.
Yeah,
so it's really fascinating.
That
so
is interesting.
Breadth.
Just read a book, and I don't know if you've read it. It's called Exercised by Daniel Lieberman.
No, but I saw you posted that, and I want to read it.
Oh my gosh, it is so good. It's like an anthropological approach to exercise, and basically how we don't exercise. Like when he goes and he talks to some of these tribes that are unaffected by modern society, and they do these really challenging events, and he asks, how do you train for them? They actually don't even understand what he's saying. Like, wow. What do you mean train? How do you prepare? What do you mean prepare for this event? They don't prepare for it because they live it, right? They go on these really long runs and these really long hunts, but it's part of their life and who they are and what they do. So it's not like, here's our season for training, and this is in season, this is preseason, this is off season. It's life. And anyway, such a fascinating book from an incredible researcher who was able to dumb it down for me to understand it. So I really suggest the book. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I added it actually when I saw your post.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm totally reading it. Yeah.
Just add something else to the list.
Yeah, like a hunter-gatherer populations like the Hadza and the Han tribe in the Kalahari Desert, they move much more than we do, right? They're constantly moving, not necessarily exercising. And then you see people, the older adults in those populations don't succumb to the type of physical ailments that modern humans do, or sort of industrialized humans do, because they are moving all the time.
Yeah. And it's a fascinating read that discusses it. And then anyway, I think it's worth reading. It's worth exploring that book for you, which in particular, I think you would just find absolutely fascinating, but also for our listeners, I think they'll find it fascinating as well. So let's get into talking about stress, and let's talk about how, how exercise, how stress affects the brain. In a negative way. And then I just listened to Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk a day or two ago, and she was talking about some of the beneficial effects of stress on the brain. So what are some of the negative effects? And then it can be a controversial topic, but are there positive effects of stress on the brain?
So, yeah, I think it depends on how we define stress. And the good thing for us, for you and me, I suppose, and the rest of us out there, is that a lot of what we experience as stress is psychological stress. So a lot of psychological stress, no one's beating us up every day, hopefully. Like, I don't think you're getting beat up by your wife every day. Kids are not hitting you. We're not starving, right? We have access to what we need for our sort of physical needs. Yeah. But humans are very, very sensitive to social evaluation. So this is the history of humankind, is the history of humans who require other humans to stay alive. And so for that reason, the thing that humans don't handle well is stress, especially when there's a social evaluative component to it. And so anything that has that, and then if you want to throw on other things that are really difficult for us, it's when we take away your lack of perceived control and your lack of perceived predictability. And this is what sort of we think of as chronic stress in humans. And then most of the time when these things are happening to us, we're ruminating about it. And so we're really creating that chronic process of stress by thinking about these, psychological everyday sort of daily life hassles that are happening to us. And so we do that, we're releasing obviously stress hormone. And I guess that's, for me, is one of the catches with stress, is because a lot of people think cortisol is bad. We want to lower cortisol. Cortisol is horrible for us, but the reality is cortisol's fine. Millions of years of evolution have assured that cortisol is going to do what it needs to do to keep you alive. It's us, our brains that are the problem, and we're just not really adapted to live in an environment with this much social interaction and this much social stress. And so we tend to get dysregulated cortisol. It's really a modern brain that sense that our evolution hasn't caught up to our technology.
Right. And we talk different types of evolution. There's kind of this physical evolution, but there's social evolution.
Right.
And social evolution is going through this stratospheric change where, just a few generations ago, there weren't even cars, right? They were just now getting light bulbs, right? So we're looking at something that has gone from a complete revolution in transportation, and now into this incredible revolution in technology and being able to connect with people all over the place. But this connection, I thought I heard it stated really well, is, we look at processed food, and processed food is something where we can get this refined sugar and it tastes really good, but it's not really good for our system. And now we're getting processed information, processed data, and it tastes really good to our brains, but being hit with that over and over again is not really good for our brains. This highly refined feeding of data and information where we never get really past the surface layers of very many things, and we just keep getting hit with sugar bumps. And I wonder what that effect is going to be on us and our attention spans and our capacity to focus and things like that.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, and that need for social interaction is there, and so especially social media, it kind of like scratches that itch, but not necessarily in a very healthy, meaningful way. And that's the problem, is we need real, genuine social interactions to reduce stress and to be emotionally well. And it's one of those things where, largely the human brain hasn't changed for 200,000 years. About 40,000 years ago, we sort of had this great leap forward in terms of communication and culture, but it's the same brain. You can't put that brain in a modern environment and expect it to adapt very quickly. Sort of like with your ukulele example, we expect things to come quickly because we live in an environment where things come quickly, but your brain doesn't care. It still takes a certain amount of time to learn. Learning is slow, whether we want it to be faster or faster.
Did you hear that, people studying for your CPT exam or your CES or your PES or your nutrition course? For all of you that want it to come faster, you just have to be patient and you have to be consistent.
Yeah,
and sleep. And you have to sleep.
Imagine these like little dendrites changing, right? They're changing their strength, they're changing who they're talking to, they're branching off. You wouldn't expect to get big muscles overnight if you go to the gym, right? You give yourself time to get hypertrophy. So it's the same thing. You got to give your brain time to make those new connections and strengthen them.
Oh, really well said. Well, what is the effect then of, you kind of created this society of neurosports, this society where we take and understand movement and its effect on the brain. Is there something we know empirically that suggests that exercise and movement and activity can have a positive effect on that kind of stress that we might have, kind of physiologically, emotional, things like that, the stress that we experience in our self?
Yeah, for physical brain wellness, emotional brain, it really comes down to the fact that if you want to have a healthy brain, you absolutely have to have a moving body. These things are very clear to us.
Wow.
That we get, which we've all heard of, most of us heard of, BDNF as one of the hormones that's released when we're exercising, and irisin and osteocalcin from our bones. Like all of these chemicals that are released with exercise are good for your brain. In many ways, and it's certainly good for brain plasticity. One of our speakers will talk about brain plasticity and learning and memory, but emotional wellness as well, so that we see exercise being used as adjuvant therapy for things like anxiety and depression. In the original study we did, we had people, but we want to say that one of the things with exercise is it has to be volitional, right? You can't force somebody to run on a treadmill. Once it's not volitional, it becomes a stressor. So
okay, I get what you're saying now.
Like, I've never want to go to the gym, but I've never walked out of the gym feeling like, oh my God, that was like the worst hour of my life. You walk out of the gym and you feel like you have the blood of the gods.
Yeah, right.
And you're really happy. So in our study, we did show that if we let people, jog on a treadmill for about half an hour, and we took them off and we looked at their brains and we showed their brains, really, really nasty images. And then we showed their brains some sort of neutral, like coffee cup, pencil, relative to, like mutilated body, gunshot, things that are really disturbing, that they did have a little bit of protection against those negative images compared to a control condition. So it was the same people under control and exercise condition, counterbalanced. And under the exercise conditions, their brain responded in a healthier way to these emotional insults that we were showing them. I guess we're not good people for doing that, but.
No, yeah. How did you get that past the IRB? That sounds wrong.
I'll have you know that these pictures, your tax dollars paid for them.
I have to talk to somebody about that. So when you mentioned volitional, it made me, so in my mind, I was like, well, some people do things that are for work, right? Like, so is there a benefit for people who have jobs that are physically active that create some type of support for them?
I don't think we've looked closely enough at that group, the group of people that they're doing sort of physically intensive labor work. We have looked at athletes here at my university, and it's sort of that thing where they maybe not doing as well at the end of the season because of the wear and tear. It's almost like most things in biology fall along an inverted U, where you don't want too little, but sometimes you don't want too much either. You want that sweet spot, and I suspect exercise is the same, right? You want to be at that right level of exercise where you're not damaging your body, but you're able to get those benefits from it, especially those brain benefits.
Yeah, and I've experienced exercise like that where I committed I was going to do an exercise, and I went into it, and I wasn't feeling it, but I was pushing myself to do it. And then, several miles into the run, I just said I have to stop running because I'm so miserable that I know if I keep pushing myself, I won't run next time because I'll be thinking about this part right here that I really dislike. And so I walked, and it probably only walked for about 2 or 3 minutes. And then I started running again, and I felt fine, and I was good mental space. And I was kind of disappointed in myself for not having completed the run without taking a break. But that break for me in that moment during that workout was so valuable in helping me kind of reset everything and get into a better place, so that I wasn't looking at the exercise as, well, here's your mandate, here's your requirement, here's your thing that is awful that you have to do because you committed to doing it. And trust me, I think that, you commit to exercise. A lot of us have to do that just to get moving, but I don't think that it should ever feel like a punishment.
Right. And I think it sort of takes us back to this idea of what's a stressor, and exercise does become a stressor when it's perceived to be a stressor. We could almost imagine setting up an experiment where, you're running and doing your run every day and you're getting those benefits out of it. But then if we yoked somebody to you where they had to do what you did and they didn't have control over what they were doing, that person, we would be pretty sure would actually show deleterious effects of exactly what you did and got the good effects of it because they're having to do what you did. And so that, that's the interesting experiment that we always talk about doing, is yoking somebody to somebody else's purposeful exercise.
Now, is that what group fitness is, though? Like, is group exercise doing that? Or is that just because I volunteered to be a part of your exercise so that you could lead me through it, that I would still get the good juice out of it instead of maybe the deleterious version?
Like for most human interactions, especially when it comes to stress, it's the perception of the event that matters.
Okay.
So as long as you perceive that you went into that event volitionally, that is usually associated with positive outcomes. But it also lets us know how much we're in control of. The one thing at the end of the day that we control is our thoughts. I mean, it sounds easy when I say that, but
just like that.
It's so hard. But the more we can get control over our thoughts, the better off we are in general. Especially those, your brain's hardwired for a negativity bias. We love thinking negative things. We get rewarded for thinking negative things. We remember negative events over positive events. And so the more we can get control over that, the better off we are, whether it's going into an exercise or thinking about the event that happened. You could be going on your jog and see these, beautiful birds and wildlife and be enjoying the day, and the sun is shining on you just perfectly. And your friend walks by and you wave, and he doesn't wave, and you just think he blew you off. It doesn't matter, all those wonderful things. Your brain's going to focus on your perception that your friend ignored you, right? So we do that. Our brains are hardwired to do that. And so it's sort of hard to fight against those sort of negative biases.
I get that. So true. I want to introduce everybody again to Dr. Jamie Tartar, PhD. She is the program director of neuroscience at the Nova Southeastern University in Florida. I do want to find out what interesting research you've done lately, since you are the research kind of director over there. What's some of the interesting research that's come out recently?
Well, we've done a few different studies more recently that we're hoping to publish soon. So one of the studies that we did, we looked at, because we talk about sleep a lot. You and I have talked about it, and we've talked about the issues associated with light at night and blue light in particular. So we did a study where we gave people blue light blockers, little really cool glasses that they could wear.
Yeah.
And we did show that was able to increase evening melatonin levels. Which is so important for sleep. Yeah. So we just some shades that they wore. We had them text them and had them put them on around 6 p.m. And did a pretty good job that their melatonin levels were significantly increased relative to the time we were wearing them. So we're kind of excited about that.
That is a cool little bit of study. And am I correct that it's because blue light does have an effect on us staying awake, and basically every single light that's being emitted in our house is producing blue light, so that could adversely affect our sleep?
Yeah, I mean, there are these things called Zeitgebers that are like timekeepers in your environment that control your sleep-wake cycle, and light is above and beyond the strongest signal, because you literally have little receptors in your retina. And their only job is to say, oh, there's blue light or there's not blue light. And they go directly to the clock in your brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
It's my favorite word in neuroscience.
So that tells you what time of day it is. And it signals the release of melatonin. So light is one of those signals that starts and stops your sort of circadian day. So blue light regulation is way more important than I think people recognize. And light at night, being exposed to light at night, is even associated with developing cancers. So we want to be very careful about light regulation.
Wow. How was that kind of information parsed out? Was it a longitudinal epidemiological study that showed that there's a correlation between people that stayed up late at night or had additional light exposure that exposed them to cancers?
Well, a lot of this work comes from looking at shift workers, because we know workers have a lot of deleterious health consequences for a variety of reasons, but a lot of those are associated with circadian misalignment. And a lot of that particular finding, I think the original study was a big study called the Nurses' Health Study, and it turned out that nurses who were working at night had increased risks for breast cancer. And they were able to associate that back to light exposure, which is really dysregulated melatonin at night.
Wow.
And you can stay up all night. Like, you can shift. Let's just be like living in Asia. It's just that you have to be very careful to make sure that during your day, you get blue light in your morning and tapering off during the day. And at night, you need to sleep in the dark, not with the lights and the sun shining on you.
You know what? I'm not a big fan of the term hacking or biohacking, but that sounds like a pretty awesome hack with the glasses and putting those on around 6 p.m. And I have a pair. That if I know I'm doing a lot of computer work, then I put on my blue blocking glasses to just try to protect my eyes and protect the blue light exposure. But those might just be kind of a nighttime wear that I put on. I'll set an alarm for myself at 6 p.m.
I do it. Even my office is sort of like, you can't see it's behind me, but I have a light that I put on in the morning because I work in a building that emulates blue light, and I put it on in the morning, and I set the settings to dim during the day. So I'm concerned about it enough that I do it.
Oh, that's awesome. I also have on my phone, actually, I've got a blue light blocker screen protector on there. So to try to limit my exposure to blue light. So I'm not unfamiliar with blue light. And I also know that at nighttime, I probably look at this maybe a little more than I normally would, or more than I should. So anything to try to limit that blue light exposure.
Yeah, well, except in the morning. So in the morning, it is good. And that's why I shine that light on my face. And I don't want to do it now. Like every pore on my face. But, or just going outside for a walk, getting that morning light is important. So we have to be aware of that as well.
Brilliant. Are there any, and I know that you're working with some people really on the kind of the positive outlook of things when it comes to neuroscience, and there are positive approaches that athletics and activity have on us. Can you give us a little bit more idea, this kind of positive psychology? And there's been a wonderful shift in positive psychology and research that focuses on, like Dr. Martin Seligman with Flourish, and you mentioned Flow with, man, I'm not going to pronounce this guy's name correctly, but Nihai Csikszentmihalyi. And that was my attempt, talking about flow states, and you mentioned flow states.
Yeah.
What is that connection between movement and flourishing, and movement and flow, and how does our activity levels and our intensity levels affect those brain outcomes?
So there is research to suggest that both, like resistance training can help too, that you don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be like high intensity exercise, that both are good. I don't study flow. One of the speakers coming to Neurosports, Dr. Bertram, he's going to talk about flow state specifically as a countermeasure to fatigue, to mental fatigue. And Dr. Menino, who's on our advisory board, is actually going to talk about the moving mind.
Nice.
But I definitely agree that with you that, a lot of times, especially in my field, we take things away and we look at the negative effects. So we looked at the negative consequences of doing X on Y. We looked at a study of people who weren't getting enough sleep and they have poor gut microbiome, and we sleep deprive people and we see all these horrible things. So to your point, one of the next studies we want to do is go in that positive direction, and we want to give people more sleep and look at the gut microbiome, sort of looking at if we improve health, if we improve people's habits, whether it's in this example, we're going to have them sleep more, can we get those good outcomes as opposed to constantly showing the detrimental effects of stress and the detrimental of sleep deprivation? So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. We also showed, we have a study in press right now that we looked at the effects of stress on men and women. And this is with my friend Julius that you're going to be interviewing soon.
I am. By the way, thank you for that connection. I'm really looking forward to speaking with him.
Yeah, he's fantastic. So he and a couple of my colleagues here at NSU, we looked at men and women, and we gave them stress, cold stress, and then we looked at their cortisol levels and their self-reported stress. And it was really interesting for us because we saw that in men, if the males had high anxiety, self-reported anxiety, and high self-reported aggression, they seemed to have high cortisol levels. But the men who had low anxiety and low self-reported aggression didn't have as high of a cortisol stress response, and which was interesting to see this disconnect. But we saw nothing in women. There was no relationship at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was just in men. So the next step for us is to say, okay, well, if this seems to be something unique to men, could we see that if we treat anxiety and aggression, can that help with male stress response? Or maybe men are reacting to stress in a way that's unique from women. And so it would be interesting to take kind of that positive approach and see if we can move things in a good direction.
Wow, fascinating. So this was if they were kind of anxious about being in this cold environment. Is that what the difference was?
This was, we gave them surveys for their just self-reported regular state and trait, but it was the trait things that mattered, whether they were trait anxious or trait have high, like everyday aggression.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm sure people putting in their concerns about being cold in the state of Florida is probably more significant than in other states.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this particular, it's a really common stressor, laboratory stressor. It's called the cold pressor test, and it's basically like a bucket of ice water. It's like 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, and you have people put their non-dominant hand up to their wrist for at least a minute, and it's it's not fun.
No, it sounds awful. And I know people who do their entire body in a cold plunge like that for 3 minutes. And I'm the guy having the stressor just watching them do it. So I would not respond well. My traits would be I would skew the data with how much I don't like being cold. But with that said, there's some other interesting things just by that test that you talked about. And I just want to get confirmation from you. And this is by no means am I endorsing this, but I heard when people do that test and then shout profanities, they're able to stay cold, keep their hand in the cold longer.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, if they're not saying it out loud, they're saying it in their head.
Yeah, there was something about the audibilization of that allowed people to keep their hands in the cold longer. I don't know. I think there's probably a lot of truth to it. And again, not advocating it, nor am I advocating just putting your hand in a cold bucket of water to see if it works or not. But again, it's just such an interesting thing. First of all, what people can find to research, but also the information that we learn about people and about humans. And I just think people like you, the PhDs out there that are doing research and finding out information to help us better understand the human condition is really valuable. And I want to shout you out along with many other researchers and scientists out there that are helping us figure out more about who we are and how we can optimize that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're excited. And we definitely show, and that's sort of with stress is, like, I mean, I'm in the business of sleep, but I'm also in the business of stress. And what I think is amazing is this idea that everyone's so afraid of cortisol going up, but I'm in the business of moving cortisol, and we've had people like run on treadmills. We've done time to exhaustion tests where you just run until you're basically falling off the treadmill. And I just really want to underscore this point that cortisol is very closely regulated in your body. I can't get cortisol to move, no matter how hard I make somebody physically exert themselves. Their cortisol levels they don't go up with exercise. And I think that's sort of a misunderstanding. And we've done this in multiple studies. Cortisol is not particularly sensitive to physical stress the way adrenaline is. Adrenaline levels go up with physical exercise.
Interesting.
But we bring somebody into a lab and we give them a stressor where we make them give a speech for 5 minutes in front of an audience, and then their cortisol levels go through the roof.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it really is social stress that we're very, very sensitive to, especially our cortisol levels.
Well, do you have a moment that just to speak to cortisol maybe a little bit more, because there is a lot of confusion out there about cortisol, and cortisol has just kind of been demonized in many ways, but it's a blessing. Like you need to have cortisol. Cortisol is a big part of us being able to wake up in the morning. There are a lot of benefits from cortisol. What is cortisol? What does it do in a healthy body? And then when does it turn into something that is bad?
Yeah, so cortisol, you need cortisol to stay alive. Without cortisol, you have Addison's disease. You don't. So the cortisol has a lot of important jobs. Its most important job, I think, is to rein in the immune system, right? So if you get like swelling on your arm, you put basically cortisol on it to bring down the inflammation.
Right.
So you've got to have cortisol in order just to control inflammation in the body. But I think a lot of people think that if they do aerobic exercise, they're gonna get fat because cortisol makes you fat.
Right. Yeah.
In a disease state, with Cushing's disease, you may get weight gain, especially on the abdomen and the face with increased cortisol levels. But cortisol is a steroid hormone, and it like all hormones we all remember from biology, they follow a very strict negative feedback loop. So when cortisol levels are high in the morning, and they should be, because you need that energy, right? You need glucose and all those wonderful things about cortisol to get you moving. And then as the day goes on, your cortisol levels should go down. Around 4 p.m., they kind of go down, and a lot of us get sleepy around them when cortisol kind of plummets, and we just got to move past that. But just working out alone isn't going to cause cortisol levels to be dysregulated, because once they get high, they bind to lots of different places in your body, but they specifically bind to your hippocampus. And when cortisol binds to hippocampus, that basically tells the first part of that sort of loop to stop, right? So they peak slowly, maybe about 20 to 30 minutes after the event started, but then they shuts itself down. The hippocampus will say, like, all right, guys, we responded, shut it down. We're done responding to stress. So you have that beautiful negative feedback loop that ensures that when cortisol levels get high, they don't stay high.
Okay.
The only time to worry about that is that, it can get dysregulated, but that's really, it comes with chronic stress, sort of chronic unremitting, unpredictable stress is where we get into issues with cortisol dysregulation, but not exercise.
And so when that happens, this kind of chronic stress, that there's something's going wrong where it's not signaling to shut that off, or something's going wrong where the stress just keeps coming in, and so it forces that loop to continue.
Yeah, it goes back to those sort of evolutionary explanations we have. Your body just simply isn't really adapted to deal with chronic psychological stress like that. And so just almost like with diabetes, the receptors for cortisol, they're called glucocorticoid receptors. And they just you get resistance to them. You get resistance to cortisol. And so that's why one of the symptoms of chronic stress is issues with inflammation, because when cortisol becomes dysregulated, then you get sort of this runaway inflammation can become a problem.
Gotcha. It's such an interesting topic. All the things that you study, I find to be fascinating. So thank you for being on the show and sharing that with us. And thank you for giving us some insights into this conference that you have coming up. Just if you want to plug the conference, tell us when it is again, what's going on. And I'd love to direct some people that direction. I just think it's good stuff for us to be familiar with.
Yeah, a huge range of topics. I would definitely think everybody would be interested. If you're interested in exercise and you're at all interested in performance in the brain, it's the conference for you. We are going to have it on March 26th and March 27th, and you can register at neurosports.net. You can register to attend the webinar, or you can register to come see us in person. And it's a 2-day conference, and we're also going to have a data blitz. So we're going to have 1-minute presentations for those of us that don't have a really good attention span. So I'd love to see everybody there.
Smart. I'll be attending those for sure. I can take that bite-sized information. We're going back to those little glucose hits of data. Just give me my sugar bump and let's go.
Yeah, well, you gotta get it out.
Good luck with the conference that's going to be coming up. I'm looking forward to attending. Oh, real quick question. Put you on the spot in our group here. Are there any continuing education credits for people that are NASM certified?
There are continuing education credits for American Psychological Association, for ISSN, and we're applying for National Strength and Conditioning Association. And I think we'd have to talk to you about getting them for.
Excellent. Well, let's have that conversation. Let's get some.
We need NASM credits.
Yeah, some NASM credits for that, and then. I'm sure you'll get a lot more people raising their hand wanting to participate. Otherwise, you'll have to actually just be interested in the topics and not get anything out of it but information. So it's okay. You can pay and learn something without getting credits, but then you still have to go back and get credits. And we get NASM continuing education credits for it. That would be fantastic. And then we could talk offline about how to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that.
Excellent. Perfect. All right. So again, we've been talking with Jamie Tartar about the brain and exercise and movement. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Rick Ritchie. Appreciate you being here. If you want to reach out, ask any questions, hit me up on Instagram at dr.rickritchie, or you can email me rick.ritchie, RICHEY, at nasm.org. This has been the NASM-CPT podcast.